Story setup is always incredibly valuable. I really enjoy it because there's a lot of different routes that you can take. There's a lot of information that you can give. How much information should you give? How many characters should you push forward? What type of vision or direction or simply idea should you give out to your readers? How much do you want them to actually know? So when you get a chapter like this that's filled to the brim with a lot of different ideas, a lot of different characterizations, a lot of different growth patterns and prospects for future development, future arcs and future quote-unquote war, it's a really big thing. While it's crystal clear in its direction, the uneasiness seeps in. The cracks form underneath, the unpredictable, the mystery, everything that the Hishaku actually stand for, their goal, their idea, their movement is unpredictable. That's very important, very valuable. To balance that setup, giving it character drive and direction is a really great idea, and that's exactly what we get. The first portion of this chapter is dialogue, the group setting, the relationship, the back and forth banter between one another. It is the next day. People are healing, people are resting, yet what they need to do, how fast it's approaching, doesn't change. I will say there's a very beautiful moment in here where everyone's just playing games on the bedside of Chihiro and Hakuri waiting to wake up. Something simple but super effective just to show their personalities a little bit more, to give a bit more characterization, which I really enjoy. But I think the biggest thing that comes from it is their contribution to each other. And basically how well they mesh with each other, how well they work as a group, how well they could team up if needed to be. And I've always wondered if Hiyuki would become a part of Chihiro's squad more on a personal level rather than just being a Kamunabi side assistant that pops in and out of the story. It's difficult to balance that idea because she's incredibly powerful, incredibly skilled, and the value that she has being with the Kamunabi that way helps Chihiro independently away from his group. So Chihiro has his team, his group with all of their different abilities and capabilities, and then Hiyuki is there with everything she can offer. It's a great way to balance different ideas, to get different pockets of information from two different perspectives. However, Hiyuki just being a part of Chihiro's team, and this small panel here with them playing games is beautiful. I love it. Past the growth, characterization, and general back and forth between these characters, what they discuss in detail is the future. Where do we go from here? Obviously, we know that Chihiro is going to join, or at least try to join the Kamunabi. We don't know that method. We don't know how that works. We don't know if they're going to instantly trust him, which perhaps not going to be a thing, and instead put him through different trials and tribulations to prove his worth. While he is known and technically a quote-unquote criminal, the idea of him having N10, another sword, added to the Kamunabi's collection is something that they really just can't ignore. Plus, he potentially has the side recommendation of Hiyuki who can vouch to a point for him. It's not going to be overwhelmingly in his favor, but he's definitely going to have to do something in return. Something to prove his worth to the Kamunabi, which he does kind of offer, at least in theory. See, the problem that we have now, which is kind of brewing the altercation, which perhaps could happen, and then the answer or response that Chihiro gives is all starting to work in tandem really nicely. Firstly, this is all going to the Hishaku's plan. They pop in at the beginning to acknowledge that this is going well. It also seems like perhaps their group is rotated off of a couple of different leaders and not just the one that we constantly see, which would make sense to balance out power over different districts. You would want multiple different leaders that all work in tandem with each other. So I would say perhaps there is the leaders, the one that we have seen and a couple of others, some of their generals, right-hand men, and then the affiliates or separate entities of bodies that work underneath them, like Kiora, for example. Obviously, they want Shinichi in the Kamunabi's control. The Hishaku have been planning for this, and Chihiro and his group understand this as well. Secondly, there's a couple of different ways that the Kamunabi could deal with the Hishaku and Shinichi. Sealing it, putting a new seal on it, seems like the best possible outcome. Currently, they have the sword bearer for Magatsumi or Shinichi. Putting a seal on it and separating them once again would probably be the best outcome for safety. However, because of the confidence that the Hishaku have with tracking the Shinichi and getting into the Kamunabi headquarters, also mentioning an inner fracture makes me believe that perhaps they already have a plan to get inside. more so in the realm of the fracturing of the Kamunabi group, and also perhaps something that the Hishaku has done to Shinichi as a sword. They viewed the whole Kyora situation as an experiment, so I'm wondering if they've actually added or done anything to the sword to be able to properly track it. So the 2.5 is this puts the Kamunabi and the Hishaku at a bit of a deadlock. They cancel each other out. The Kamunabi have the sword bearers and the Hishaku have the enchanted blades. The Hishaku need the sword bearers so they can properly use the enchanted blades. So what they need to do is obviously go and kill the sword bearers that are in the Kamunabi's control. Heavily, and I mean extremely heavily guarded to the teeth. So much so that the Kamunabi can't really function properly. They operate at a lower frequency because all of their resources are going to protecting the sword bearers, which makes sense. Because of this deadlock, this is where the answer, number 3, comes in with Chihiro. He wants to offer a way to the Kamunabi to prove his value to them, that he can break the deadlock between them. Basically showing the Kamunabi that they don't have to use Magatsumi or Shinichi to obliterate the Hishaku. Instead, sealing it away might be a better option and let Chihiro use Enten and Hakuri to deal with the deadlock. Now, how do you think this would be possible? Hakuri has a really great ability, and we've seen that on full display in the previous arc. Basically, he can teleport things using people's spiritual energy. So all he would simply have to do is perhaps touch the sword bearer and then teleport their sword back to them. Sounds easy enough, but it isn't. The sword bearers that Chihiro's father entrusted the enchanted blades to, once again, are under heavy protection, but they're not in the same place. They are scattered all across Japan and heavily guarded by the Kamunabi. Now that might sound like a great idea, an easy one in fact. Here's all the information that you need of their location, who's guarding them, and where exactly you can find them. However, they're not going to trust Chihiro. Secondly, even if they did, we are already led to believe that the Kamunabi has been poisoned, that there are certain people on the table of the Kamunabi that don't want to see this work this way. Easily, there's probably going to be people in there that work directly for the Hishaku, or at least associated with them to some degree. Basically, everyone on the Kamunabi's table currently view the swords differently. How they should be used, how they should be sealed, how they should be possessed, who should own them, who should have them. I guess it really boils down to the question of, should the Kamunabi have all of the swords and all of the power? Naturally, you might think sure, but they're not as innocent as they're made out to be. Nor do they have the purpose of protecting the innocence of people, protecting civilians. A very easy way that you can kind of view this is looking at the colleagues that Hiyuki actually mentions in regards to the Kyora operation. How they helped and contributed to the Magatsumi unsealing and all of the death and destruction that it caused. They did not care. They did not try to help people. They didn't even really lift a finger. All they were there to do was to witness it. Now you could make the argument, well, they're official Kamunabi members, they can't make a big scene or something crazy is going to happen. Sure, but that is where Chihiro comes in. The reason why Hiyuki works so well with him, and while they kind of share the same brain cell in helping people, is that they're willing to sacrifice themselves to put others first. The Kamunabi so far, not necessarily. It sounds good on paper, but actions say otherwise. And we already know that something is going on with their approach to the swords in general, so it's conflicted. So far, we have 4 separate locations to work with, 4 different sword bearers. I'm curious on how Chihiro is going to get there, how he's going to obtain that information, and honestly, if he works in hand or side by side with Hiyuki, I think that'd be a great balance. Them two going on missions to kind of prove his worth before he gets anywhere close to getting that type of information. Of course, the Hishaku is perhaps getting fed information, so they're constantly operating on a frequency a step above everyone else. At any moment, they could make their move, and that adds back-end pressure to this entire situation. But if they know that Chihiro is looking for all of the sword bearers, then they have someone that they can follow. And they could potentially find all of the locations for the sword bearers and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Dismantle the Kamunabi in its entirety because all of their forces are there, and kill the sword bearers. I do think it would be a very difficult task for the Hishaku to do that. They are powerful sorcerers, but with all of the resources that the Kamunabi have around these people, it seems more of a cat and mouse game, not in sheer strength or power. I do like to think that perhaps this sets up a war arc close to the 100 chapter milestone, and I've been incredibly excited to see how this author would handle a big, long war. Some of the biggest and best stuff that you could imagine. We're close to 50 chapters, so this arc could run into that 100 chapter mark if it was on the longer side. And I, for one, can definitely see that being a possibility and something that I have my fingers crossed for.